Yeah, that's right. But let's get to know each other a little first. Again, I'm Captain JD. I've been doing this for about a year. If you subtract the COVID hiatus we were on. I've born and raised here in San Antonio. Can everyone just start yelling out where you're from?
Salina, Kansas.
Where?
Salina, Kansas.
Salina, Kansas.
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon.
Honduras.
Honduras. San Francisco.
Albany, New York.
Houston. Albany, New York.
Orlando. Arkansas.
Arkansas? Kansas?
Arkansas.
Wherever you're from, welcome to San Antonio. I do have some rules. I'm going to lay down the law a little bit. I'm a very stern captain. That's a... This rule number one, I need everyone to keep your butt cheeks in your seat. Do not stand up for any reason. Rule number two, don't touch anything outside the boat. We have some low bridges, some plants and stuff, and there's something about human psychology that makes you want to touch the low bridges. Don't touch the low bridges or anything outside. We have had people hurt their fingers trying to touch things, and so we try to just ask you politely to keep all of your squishy parts inside, please. Rule number three, if you're going to talk, I need you to kind of keep a lid on it. Don't be too loud. Don't be disruptive. Other people on the boat are trying to listen to my beautiful baritone voice narrate the city of San Antonio. So if you're loud, someone else might not be able to hear my voice. So just, be respectful. I can't take you off. I can do it if you're crazy on me. That being said, let's learn about San Antonio. Oh, I want you to know that we do have herons in the trees right now, at least for a little while longer. They're really big gray birds. They're really, really cool. But because they're so large and they have their nests above the water, there is a potential for getting pooped on. I got pooped on today, actually. But if you're wondering why I have these Clorox wipes here, that's the reason. I'm ready to go if you get hit. That being said, the San Antonio River. This river is about 15,000 years old. People have been living around this river for about 10,000 years. And they lived here around in this area, today known as San Antonio, because we are just a few miles away from the source. It's a spring, it's a small little spring called the San Antonio Spring. The people that lived here for thousands of years were called Payayas. The Payayas are for whom the Catholics built the mission. The first mission built in San Antonio, there's 5 of them. The first mission is the Alamo. The Alamo is on the other side of this hotel right here. This is the Hyatt Regency, it's a beautiful hotel. You go through the hotel, up the stairs to the other side, you're looking straight at the Alamo. There's actually a brand new exhibit. Most of the Alamo is gone today, but there's a brand new exhibit where they've recreated one of the whole segment of the original wall. You can actually stand on it and look out over the river. So it's not particularly far over the river, it's crazy. Kind of an experience. Anyway, I'll talk more about the Payayas and the early history in a little bit, but I want to explain why we have a Riverwalk. This river, the natural flow of the Riverwalk is really shallow. It's way too small for any kind of watercraft. It's like a little creek. But in 1921, there was a really big flood in this area, and it damaged a lot of buildings. A lot of people died. And the city, in order to prevent the next catastrophe, built the flood channel. The flood channel is at the end of the tour. We're going to go through it. I'll show you how that works later. That was in 1929. And when they built that flood channel, that inspired a local architect named Robert Hubbard to design the Riverwalk. He drew up the blueprints for everything you see right now. And he spent 10 years showing these blueprints to anyone who would listen. The name that he had for the project was a little more fancy than the Riverwalk. He wanted to call it the Shops of Aragon and Romulus, which is not a great name, but that's what he wanted to call it. And the name didn't stick. After 10 years of convincing people in 1939, Robert Hubbard got a bonus. He got some money from Franklin Roosevelt. The U.S. government was handing out money trying to stimulate the economy. And so they used some of those federal resources and federal workers. They built the Riverwalk in 2 years, and they opened it up in 1941. And then, if you look over to the right of the boat right now, above the blue umbrellas, you'll see the name of the guy that I'm talking about. That's Robert Hubbard's office. He put his office there in 1941. This is a bust in his face right here. That's what it looks like if you were metal. He put his office there to show people that he was confident that the Riverwalk was secure, that you could build your restaurants down here and they would be safe from flood. But there wasn't enough because nobody believed him until he was down here by himself for 5 years. Until 1945, when they flood in this area. Not a terrible one, but it proved the point that flood channel worked. And then in 1946, the first restaurant opened on the Riverwalk. And it's this one right here next to us. And when there's people at the table, I like to go, the Caserio! And they all clap because they just think they're supposed to. It's kind of fun. But it doesn't really work on Monday. But anyway, and this was the first restaurant built in 1946. This is kind of where the Riverwalk was born. And for a while, this really was this is what the Riverwalk was, just this restaurant. And then you had a little dock over here where you could rent some paddle boats, canoes, or what have you. So for a long time, the Riverwalk was just kind of a local thing. You know, it wasn't like today we have people from all over the world, crazy places like Portland. You know, it's a big tourist attraction. But it wasn't that way for 20 years. Some people even said that the Riverwalk was a failure because it wasn't bringing people from other places. Locals loved it, locals always loved it, but it wasn't a big success. But that would change in the 1960s. San Antonio was chosen to host a World Fair, which was very exciting. Today, World Fairs are kind of, people don't really do them that much. But for a long time, it was like the Olympics for cities. They would go for like 6 months. And people were very... And you can't reliably expect millions of people to visit your town if you're hosting a World Fair. So everybody got really excited, and we spent most of the 60s rebuilding downtown San Antonio. They built so much stuff in the 60s, including this section of the river. This is a completely man-made part of the river because most of the natural river is taken up by shops and restaurants. So they thought, you know what, let's have some river with some gardens and some flowers. That's what this part was supposed to be. There's kind of a landscapey part. So they just dug a huge trench out of the ground. They added there's a big pipe down the middle, water's being pumped down. They added some sidewalks. Do you guys want to see the herons? They're really cool. We're passing several right now. Look up in the trees. See those big gray birds? She has babies in there. So they live in San Antonio for a couple months. They're only here for 2 months. And their babies are almost out of their nest. As soon as their babies are big enough, they'll take off and they'll go back to Central America. But yeah, you see how big they are, and how much, and they eat a lot, and of course they poop.
They poop to you?
I have been pooped on. They both poop and vomit. They eat crabs and crawfish, so they spit up the shells. So I've just been driving along, and suddenly like chunks of crabs will fall on my head. There's another one right here. She's got me before. We also built a tower for the World Fair, amongst all the other buildings. It's called the Tower of the Americas on the right-hand side. I know you've all seen it. It's kind of the most famous shape in our downtown area. You can go up there if you want. The top is a observation deck. If you buy tickets at the elevator, you can ride to the top. The bottom floor is a restaurant. But the coolest thing about this tower is how they built it. Look at the shape of the tower. In order to construct that tower, they actually had to go out and find the world's largest churro and stick it in the ground. And then they got a cupcake and they kind of glued it to the top, I think, and that's how they built that. So covered in sugar and cinnamon. We're going into the most recent addition to the river. Everything behind us was built in 1968. Everything in front of us was built in 1988. This part of the river was built in order to grow our convention center industry. We have a huge convention center here in San Antonio. It was originally built for the World Fair of '68. But over the years, our convention centers got very, very popular. And so back in the 80s, to help that industry grow, we built the River Center Mall and the River Center Hotel, which is connected to it. It's a beautiful mall. As you can probably guess, once COVID hit, our convention center industry shut down. A lot of the shops shut down here permanently. Some of them have come back. You know, we struggle here just like everywhere else did. Supposedly by the end of the year, there's more events that will happen at our big convention center, but not right now. So yeah, this is all built in 1988. When they built this island, was built, the boats were smaller. This little turnaround here was designed for a smaller boat with a tighter turning radius. Over the years, our ride has gotten super popular, so we've been having to build larger and larger boats. And the trade-off is, because these boats are so big, we can accommodate a lot of people, but they're kind of clumsy. These are as big as the boats can possibly be that still fit down the river. So because they're so big, they take about 2 months of training to get down the river without bumping anything. And if you go around this island too fast, you can hit the wall. I assume that's what happened with this pot here. I don't know who did that, but that was like a week ago. Somebody went really fast around that island. I don't know. I'm sure they got in trouble. I don't know who did it. No one told me. I'll tell you, just to this is kind of inside baseball stuff, but some of the boats, so we have 42 boats, and some of them, they have governors. They have speed governors on them, and some of the boats, the governors are a little light. And so if you're lucky enough to get one of the fast boats, you have a temptation when you're going around the island. You get you saw how I went really slow around that island. You can throttle it and Tokyo drift the back of your boat around that island, and it looks really cool. And I've done it in an empty boat before. But if you have people on your boat and you hit a plastic bag on your propeller just stops. And then your whatever inertia you have, you just run into the wall. I assume that's what happened. I don't know. But that's inside baseball stuff. I don't know if that's interesting. Let's talk more about the Payayas. The Payayas called this river Yanaguana. And Yanaguana meant something like spiritual waters or peaceful waters, something like that. We know that because the journal of one of Father Damien, there's a guy named Father Damien who wrote about the Payayas, wrote about the language and their culture, and he said that they called this river Yanaguana. When the Spanish missionaries arrived in the late 1600s, they named the river after that man right there, holding a baby, that is San Antonio, or St. Anthony de Padua. He is the patron saint of lost things. If you're Catholic, are any Catholics on board? I am not Catholic, but I have been told that St. Anthony is a very, very important saint. He did, if I didn't say this, he lived in Portugal 800 years ago, and that statue is a gift from Portugal. He is the patron saint of lost things. He is in charge of helping young ladies find boyfriends and selling your house. So he seems like a very busy saint. And the Catholic Church used to celebrate him. It was called they had a feast called the Feast of St. Anthony. Big holiday. Supposedly, according to legend, the first missionaries in this area found the spring. If I didn't mention this before, I should have, but the water, all the water from this river comes from a little spring, which is about 5 miles from here. And those first missionaries found that spring on the Feast of St. Anthony 332 years ago. And you can imagine just being out in the middle of Texas, hot Texas summer, you found a spring, feels like a miracle, and so they just called it the St. Anthony River because it was like a gift from him. And that name just kind of stuck around. It's Rio San Antonio. And like a few decades later, the Catholics built the first mission. We're about to go underneath Alamo Street right now. You see that big old sign? The Alamo is the first of the 5 missions of San Antonio. And it was originally called Mission San Antonio. The Alamo is a nickname, actually. You guys want to meet my favorite duck? Look at this white duck over here. You see how all of her babies stay in a tight little cluster? No other duck does that. And I am extremely fascinated by the difference of the ducks. So she started out with 9 babies. She has 6. That's really good percentage because everything wants to eat the ducklings. And then we have hawks and herons and stuff that want to eat the ducklings. I have watched, and I want you guys to know how much I suffer for you as a boat captain. I watch these ducks all day, and I have watched so many mother ducks just not even care about their children, and they'll like start out with like 11 and like lose all but like 1 or 2 to just complete negligence. And so I want to know what makes her special. But and so if any of you are ornithologists, I'd really like to talk to you after this boat, if you can help me understand. But yeah, she's better at being a duck than all the other ducks. That's kind of what, you know, when you give it the same tour 800 times a day, really the only thing to get emotional about is the lives of the birds on the river. Let's talk about the Payayas more. The Payayas lived here in San Antonio, but they didn't really build a lot. You know, it was a hunter-gatherer society. They were nomadic. They were part of a larger group of indigenous people that lived between northern Mexico and central Texas. Those people were known as Coahuiltecans. You've heard of the state of Coahuila, Mexico? The Coahuiltecan people are where they get that name. And the Payayas were part of the Coahuiltecans. And the Payayas lived here. They lived right over here. They lived in this area, but they didn't build a whole lot. So we honestly don't know that much about them. It wasn't until the Spanish showed up here that they actually started building the first homes on the river. And those homes were right in front of us. They're long gone today, but we still celebrate the location of the first village of San Antonio, and we just call it La Villita. And this is where we have, anytime San Antonio has a party, it all goes down in La Villita. Yeah, you know how New Orleans has Mardi Gras? San Antonio has the same kind of thing. It's called Fiesta. It's like a big, crazy, silly party with lots of singing and dancing and concerts and parades and costumes. And we have cascarones. You guys know what a cascaron is? You see when the herons fly, they look like pterodactyls. They're so cool. Except for they're pooping on my boat. So generally we have Fiesta in April. We didn't get to have it last year. We didn't get to have it this year either. And we're supposed to have some events next in June. So maybe if you're lucky, we'll have it next month. Yeah, it's kind of getting dark right now, but there are a couple babies that are definitely coming out of this nest right here. So if it was a little lighter, I'd show you. I've been watching all day. They're almost getting ready to fly. You can see them practice pumping their little wings. This is our river theater. It's called the Arneson River Theater. This was part of Robert Hutman's original plan in 1941. And Arneson is actually a buddy of his that helped him get funding, so he named the theater after him. This is part of La Vita. We generally are having shows in this all year. I mean, you know, before COVID, every single weekend and throughout the week, you'd see shows on this thing, but I haven't seen it been used since COVID. Fun fact, Selena performed here. Selena Quintanilla performed here when she was a teenager. And there was a movie that they shot here in San Antonio called Miss Congeniality. which I've never seen and I'm not going to see, but if I don't talk about it, people get upset with me. So Miss Congeniality was shot, they shot some scenes right there on that stage. Mostly in Los Angeles, but. If you like museums as much as I do, you should definitely check out the Briscoe. The Briscoe Western Art Museum is on the right-hand side. It has art and artifacts from Western American culture. It has some really cool exhibits. They have the battle sword of Santa Anna. Does everybody know who Santa Anna was? Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna? The president of Mexico 12 separate times. The general at the Battle of the Alamo. His sword is right in here. One of his swords, at least. If they would let me, I could probably talk for like 3 hours just on Santa Anna. If I could do my own tour. I just tell you the whole life story of Santa Anna. He was he was a terrible person, but like his life was just fascinating. It changed the course of history for both the U.S., Mexico, and Texas. But it's not up to me. I have to talk about stuff on the river. Like this bridge. This bridge was built in 1880 by the Berlin Iron Bridge Company in Connecticut. One of the ways, I believe I mentioned a few moments ago, one of the ways we know about the Payayas was because a man named Father Damien Massenet wrote about them in his journal. Father Damien loved this little island. This is a favorite place for him to preach. You see this piece of artwork back here? This is called Father Damien's table. That diamond-shaped metal thing. And 300 years ago, you see where this duck is right here? 300 years ago, Father Damien would stand right there where that duck is, and he would actually preach. He would give the first Catholic Mass. Remember, the first homes in San Antonio were over here in this area. So on Sunday mornings, if you're living over here, you come down to the river, you sit on this side of the river, Father Damien sits on the other side, and that's how you have church, which I have to imagine is a very pleasant way to, you're sitting on either side of the river. This is a very small river, so the natural flow of the river would be very, very shallow, less than a foot of water in a lot of places. There were some places where it got deep. There used to be a little waterfall right here. But coming up here on the left-hand side, if you look up, you will see the first skyscraper in Texas. Have you guys ever seen the movie Ghostbusters? This building right here was actually not in that movie. But if you look up there, you will see some gargoyles. See the gargoyles? Do you know the word gargoyle literally means gargler? It's a gargoyle. It's supposed to spit water out of its mouth. I've never seen these ones spit water out of their mouths. Supposedly they did at one point. I don't know what the story behind them is, but that's literally what the word means. Gargoyle, gargoyle. There's also creepy faces down here at the bottom. Look at this. Look underneath the arched windows, underneath the little I can't think of the word. Just down here under the pillars. These little faces. These are called grotesque faces. This style of building, this aesthetic, this is called Neo-Gothic Architecture. This was very popular in places like New York 100 years ago. In 1901, Texas discovered oil, and that changed a lot of things. Texas had been kind of an agricultural state, but since the discovery of oil, the economy was growing, the people were moving here, industry was booming, and for a while, San Antonio was the largest city in Texas. And there was a couple of brothers that lived here, and they had a dream of they wanted San Antonio to become like the next New York, the next big city of the South. That was what they saw in their head. They actually owned a little bit of land. They thought if San Antonio becomes this big mega city, the land value is going to go up. We're going to make a ton of money. So let's encourage San Antonio to grow, and let's build a New York-style skyscraper right here in the heart of Texas. This thing was way bigger than anything else in San Antonio at the time, and everybody was very excited. It was so big, so so modern, and it included a Sears and Roebuck. You see this part down here that kind of sticks out? Like a pie wedge? That was a Sears and Roebuck. This opened in March of 1929. People were very, very excited. They had a big party in downtown San Antonio, and that included an airship, a dirigible. An airship flew down from New York to fly around this tower to party with the rest of the San Antonians. And the plan seemed like it was going to work. You know, they built this one, and then other people would build more towers, and San Antonio was growing. Except their timing was terrible because the year was 1929. Does anybody know what happened that year? The Great Depression. Yeah. So the Smith brothers built the Smith-Young Tower just a few months before the stock market crashed and everybody lost all their money. They would wind up having to sell it back to the bank. They were deeply in debt. And they wound up fleeing to Dallas and living the rest of their lives there because they were hiding from their creditors. So it's actually kind of a tragic story. That's all I'm going to tell you about that one here. So anyway, we're in the deep end now. See the lights behind me? Those two lights? That's the floodgate 5. That's the big floodgate that does most of the flood control here in San Antonio. What we just went through here is floodgate 4, and we'll go through floodgate 3 in just a moment. There is 20 feet of water underneath us. There are 5 floodgates. There's this flood channel, and and deep underground there are flood tunnels too. And all this stuff protects the Riverwalk from flooding. There's nothing really to see over here, but it's crucial to the function of the river. Because we have this flood system, we have been able to guarantee, since the Riverwalk was open in 1946, that water would never get above the sidewalk. This is what Robert Hugman had to convince people that worked. He had to convince people that this would protect your restaurants. And he's been right. We've had catastrophic floods. The rest of the city can be underwater, and the Riverwalk will be just fine. Coming up here just in a second, once we go underneath this little footbridge, to the left of the boat, there's a little park. It's called Main Plaza. You can't see very well here because the trees are really leafy, but there's the San Fernando Cathedral is on the far side of the plaza. San Fernando Cathedral played a role in the Battle of the Alamo. Santa Anna at the Battle of the Alamo on March 6, 1836, Santa Anna had the Alamo surrounded. And before the battle commenced, he raised a red flag from the San Fernando Cathedral. And in war, a red flag means no prisoners. It means everybody's going to be put to death. And he did stuff like that when he was trying to consolidate power in Mexico City for a long time before the Battle of the Alamo. He did stuff like that to torment the people that he was about to go to fight, to go to battle with. But the Texans, this is kind of one of the most famous moments of the Battle of the Alamo. When the Texans saw that red flag from the walls of the Alamo, they fired a cannon off, which basically meant, bring it, let's go, let's rumble. That exhibit, I mentioned earlier, there's an exhibit where you can stand on the wall, a recreated wall of the Alamo. They're actually trying to recreate that moment a little bit. You can, if you're standing on the wall, that recreated wall, there's a painting where it looks like you're looking over the river, back over at the San Fernando Cathedral. You can see the red flag coming out of the bell tower, and there's a cannon up there. So it kind of recreates that moment a little bit. I have many more stories and tangents to go off on about San Antonio, but I have reached the end of the circle. This is the end, guys. This is right where we got on. I'm going to dock right here next to the Esquire Tavern, which, fun fact, is the oldest bar on the Riverwalk. It opened like 15 minutes after Prohibition was repealed. We really appreciate you guys riding the boats this evening. If you could please stay seated for a few moments as I get the boat all tied down and squared away. If you had as much fun as I did, feel free to tip the captain. Tips are appreciated, submitted, and accepted. That's my tip jar next to the North Vikings.